NBC News has learned that Justice Department officials are starting the process of figuring out how to wind down federal cases against Donald Trump. That's according to two people familiar. It's a huge question that we've had in the few hours we've had to understand what might be the impact of this. NBC's Ken Dilanian broke this story. Ken, what is happening? What can you tell us?
Yeah, Chris, it's not a surprise that these cases can't go forward when Donald Trump takes office. What's interesting here is that the DOJ is moving to end them even before he takes office, citing the long-standing DOJ policy that sitting presidents can't be prosecuted. And there was some thought that maybe Special Counsel Jack Smith was going to sprint through the finish line, was going to work up until the last day, force Trump to fire him, wait till a new attorney general was appointed. But that does not appear to be the thinking inside the department. The thinking is that these cases can't go forward. There's no reasonable prospect of getting to trial within the 3 months before Donald Trump takes office. These cases are mired in legal issues that would be appealed all the way to the Supreme Court had Donald Trump lost the election. So now that he's won the election, DOJ officials are thinking that, look, there's just no room to move in these cases. And so the sensible thing to do is to figure out a way to wind them down. And it may stem from Donald Trump's lawyers filing some kind of motion or making a request saying in light of the DOJ policy, you need to drop these cases. Now, there are a few wrinkles here, one of which is that the classified documents case includes two other defendants who are not subject to that policy. And it's been dismissed, obviously, but that dismissal has been appealed. And the DOJ considers that ruling to be very bad law, that it would like to be overturned. So that appeal may continue in some form. But the reality is that Donald Trump is not going to be a part of these cases. And what this means, I mean, we knew this, right? But just coming to grips with what this means intellectually is that Donald Trump is not likely to be held accountable on these very serious federal criminal charges that many people believe were worse than what Richard Nixon did or was accused of doing in Watergate. Now, there's no guarantee that Donald Trump would have been convicted at trial, but as Joyce Vance, our legal commentator, said to me this morning, what's not going to happen is he's not going to face a jury of his peers who would evaluate the evidence and render a verdict. It's going to be lost to history whether a jury would have found him guilty of these very serious crimes, including conspiring to defraud the United States, obstruction of justice, moving to conceal evidence, and, of course, retaining highly, highly classified documents.
Ken, this is only the federal cases. What's going to happen at the state case?
Well, Andrea, Donald Trump's lawyers are going to make the same arguments in the state cases. Now, the Georgia case is mired in its own miasma and is not really going anywhere.
The New York case, obviously,
the New York case, right. So Judge Merchan is facing a sentencing hearing. He's going to have to decide, and there may be an argument from Trump's lawyers that he should not pass sentence in that case, given that Donald Trump is about to take office as president. But really, there's a lot of discretion with the judge here. It's going to depend on what he decides to do.
I want to just point out,
case.
I want to talk that back. He's not technically convicted until he's sentenced. Correct, Ken?
That is correct. Under New York law, he's not a convicted felon technically until the sentence is passed and the judgment is entered, Andrea.